Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Swallowing a level 10 magical crystal would allow one to attain the level 10 power of the magical crystal, while swallowing a legendary magical crystal would allow one to attain legendary mana too. Lin Li's adventurous trip was actually very fruitful this time because he had obtained plenty of high-level magical crystals, especially when he got Norfeller to take advantage and steal a bunch of level 17 and level 18 magical crystals. Besides, even without the gains from this adventure, he wouldn't be making a loss. However, he did have plenty of uses for the magical crystals. The crystal of the Dragon of Destruction alone required a massive amount of magical crystals to sustain, and it was no simple task to hatch the Dragon of Destruction. In addition to the frequent infiltration of mental strength, mana was definitely indispensable. It required at least 100 or more legendary magical crystals. Even though the matter of incubating the dragon crystal of the Dragon of Destruction could be delayed, there was one thing that couldn't be ignored. When Lin Li set off to the Haiga mountain range, he'd already sent his men to the Dwarf Kingdom to purchase magical crystal cannons, which also required plenty of magical crystals. A level 15 magical crystal would only be enough for a few shots. One crystal cannon would be fine, but Lin Li wanted 20-odd cannons. Hence, even a legendary magical crystal would not be able to supply them with sufficient power. Not to mention, Lin Li also intended to build the legendary Skybreaker for the Tower of Dusk, which was a powerful magic weapon that could destroy even a sky castle. That would require a huge amount of magical crystals too. He couldn't possibly buy all the magic crystal cannons and not have enough magic crystal reserves. The magic crystal cannons would become nothing but display pieces if they ran out of ammunition after 2 salvos. The catastrophe that Juresco predicted was getting closer and closer. Before it arrived, Lin Li had to gather enough magical crystals for the magical crystal cannons in order to ensure that the Tower of Dusk would stay strong during the major calamity. Lin Li whipped out a level 10 magical crystal from his ring, and waved it in front of the baby elemental Wyrm that was acting pitiful. "Here, this is for you." However, the baby elemental Wyrm was not that easily fooled. It was not bothered by the level 10 magical crystal at all. It grabbed its stomach and started rolling on the floor and wailing. "Damn it, is a level 10 magical crystal not a magical crystal?" Lin Li thought as he resignedly whipped out a level 15 magical crystal. A chilly breeze brushed past Lin Li's hand, and he stared at the baby elemental Wyrm to see that it was already hugging 2 magical crystals and chewing on them while flying towards the crack with its tail wagging behind it. The level 15 magical crystals were destroyed just like that. Although Lin Li had a high net worth, he still could not help but feel the pinch. However, there was nothing else he could do, and he could not have the best of both worlds either. He had even drunk the precious Guru-level heart-piercing potion. What were a few magical crystals compared to that? Hence, he followed the Wyrm into the narrow crack and deeper down within. He then exited, only to see that they seemed to have left the valley. The crack also seemed to have become wider. Lin Li suddenly felt that the scene in front of him had become brighter, but he could not tell how wide the crack had become since it was pitch dark. There was a massive spear lying calmly on the ground in the dark. If the spear wasn't pointing straight at him, Lin Li would never guess that it was a spear, because it was so large that it looked just like a fallen pillar from an ancient palace or a large architectural structure. Everything around him was pitch black, and the large spear was the only thing that was radiating light, which allowed Lin Li to see it clearly. However, the light seemed rather faint, and it only lit up a small area around it, just like a torch whose flame was about to burn out. Lin Li had no idea where the large spear came from, who it was used by, and what was the history behind it. However, he knew that there had to be something unusual about the massive spear, because he could vaguely sense the large fluctuation in mana. Lin Li did not enter immediately even though he was led to that place by the elemental Wyrm. However, the massive magical wave was still dangerous enough for him to keep his guard up and be as conscientious as possible. Lin Li still felt a little fearful at the thought of the menacing battle that he had had with the elemental Wyrm. The magical storm, which seemed endless, was an unforgettable nightmare for anyone who had experienced it. Is there only just one spear in here? Lin Li wondered with uncertainty. He would be in deep trouble if he were to meet another elemental wyrm. He grabbed the Helios scepter and chanted gently to release a magical detection spell. Sometimes, it would be difficult to find out the truth based on his own instincts. Hence, Lin Li chose to use the detection spell. Well, at least he had to check the level of the massive magical wave and where it came from. Besides, the detection spell was much subtler and less noticeable. Soon, Lin Li received the information given by the magical detection spell, and while he was shocked, he was also thankful for the fact that he was careful and conscientious because the mana there was extremely saturated. It was just as powerful as the mana of the elemental wyrms. Projected avatar. Besides, there seemed to be another magical source in the dark that was not too far away from them, even though most of the mana came from the giant spear on the ground. What exactly was hidden in the dark? Lin Li began to grow wary, and he slowly extended his life detector towards the magic source in the dark. Before getting a clear idea of the situation, he wouldn't dare to light up the place with magic. If he were to awaken a formidable existence in there, he might just face a life-and-death battle. However, the information that he got from the life detector made him feel slightly relieved. There seemed to be no signs of life, let alone an invincible existence. There weren't any bugs at all, and it was just a dead zone. A solar sphere slowly rose up into the air. Its illumination range also gradually expanded, thus lighting up the cave. Lin Li finally realized how spacious it was. It seemed to be a cave that had its middle emptied out. However, the thing hidden in the darkness was what gave Lin Li a great shock. The illuminating spell got rid of all of the dark in the cave, and the entity that was obscured in the dark finally revealed itself. Lin Li had never expected it to be a huge magical beast skeleton. Damn it, what kind of thing can grow to such a huge size? Lin Li stared at the huge magical beast skeleton, but he could not figure out what it was. In Amril, the first thing that came to mind at the mention of a huge magical beast would be the wyrms, which many legends revolved around. Apart from the anomaly, the elemental wyrm, all other dragons were huge and terrifying. However, this massive skeleton in front of Lin Li was beyond recognizable, yet Lin Li was almost certain that it belonged to a wyrm. There was also the full corpse of the Dragon of Destruction in the Ring of Endless Storm, belonging to Lin Li amongst the summoned creatures. The skeleton of the Crimson Dragon was also all dried up. Hence, Lin Li is no stranger to wyrm skeletons. The most obvious feature of wyrm skeletons was that their horns would not fall off even after its death, and the bones of their wings would also remain intact after decomposition. However, the skeleton in front of him did not show such features. Besides, there would also be a tinge of the menace of the dragon in the corpses of the wyrms after their deaths. Although there was an aura coming from the skeleton, Lin Li knew that it was not the menace of the dragon. In that case, what kind of a magical beast did the skeleton belong to? Lin Li waved the scepter in his hand slightly, after which a ray of light was shown into the middle of the skeleton. He could identify the age of the item by using the time travel spell. That was a kind of magic that was necessary for appraisers. As a legendary mage, Lin Li would obviously face no problem. Lin Li used the time travel spell on the huge skeleton and the giant spear. Soon, he got the approximate age of both items, and discovered that it was very likely that they existed long before the Dark Age. During the prehistoric times, magical beasts dominated the mainland of Amril, and even the wyrms were not the largest during that era. In the prehistoric times, the elemental wyrm mastered the 4 elements which other magical beasts could not use for magic. Hence, physical power was particularly important to the magical beasts. Only by having a strong body could they have had a place in the chaotic world of magical beasts. Could it be the skeleton of a prehistoric magical beast? Lin Li stroked his chin and tried to recall his memories of the prehistoric magical beasts, after which he compared their characteristics with the large skeleton in front of him. Although Lin Li had never seen prehistoric magical beasts or their skeletons before, there were plenty of records and books that included a detailed description of the physique of prehistoric magical beasts. Most of their skeletal features were related to their appearance. For example, during the prehistoric times, there were giant bird-like magical beasts, which were just as large as wyrms. Their beaks, claws, and wings were the most obvious characteristics. Even a person who did not specialize in study of skeletons could tell that the skeleton did not belong to a random bird. Actually, the reason behind it was the same as the explanation for the wyrm skeleton, which was very obvious even though it was not spread out. It was truly giving Lin Li a headache. He'd initially already had a limited understanding of the magical beasts, yet none of the physiques of the magical beasts in his memory could match that of the skeleton in front of him. Kanoris had also stopped moving. If he knew about it, he definitely wouldn't miss the opportunity to show off. Besides, there was something strange about the skeleton. Even the skeletons of the mighty magical beasts would have decomposed by now. However, the skeletons in front of him not only showed no trace of decay, but gave off a gilded appearance under the reflected light. Although Lin Li was unsure what the actual reason for that phenomenon was, he could be certain that it had definitely been tampered with by a powerful force that was concentrated in the skeleton. The unknown existence was also the reason it could have been preserved until now. At the same time, it also meant that the owner of the skeleton must have been powerful. Since he could not think of a reason, Lin Li could only temporarily put away his doubts. He raised his hand and released a warlock's eyes, which allowed him to scrutinize every corner of the cave. After scanning the cave, he discovered that there seemed to be nothing too special about the cave apart from the giant spear and the skeleton. All of a sudden, the warlock's eyes stopped, and a flicker of doubt flashed in Lin Li's eyes. After the careful observation of the cave, Lin Li realized that he began to find the bones vaguely familiar. It was completely impossible, for he felt that he definitely wouldn't find the skeleton of a magical beast familiar. Besides, it was obviously not the skeleton of an ancient wyrm. The skeleton was way too huge, and Lin Li seemed to be unable to picture the entire skeleton regardless of which angle he chose to perceive it from. Hence, under the control of Lin Li, the warlock's eyes flew up to the top of the cave and gazed down at the scene below. However, when the whole image of the skeleton was relayed to Lin Li's mind through the warlock's eyes, Lin Li got a great shock. The massive skeleton seemed to resemble a human skeleton when looked at through the warlock's eyes. Yes, it was obviously a human skeleton whose hollow eyes seemed to be two caves, while the neatly arranged ribs seemed to be curved pillars. Although everything was humongous beyond imagination, it was definitely the skeleton of a human, though enlarged thousands of times. It did seem to be a skeletal warrior. Lin Li was certain that he had recognized it correctly. It would really be ridiculous if he couldn't even recognize the human skeletal structure. After looking at the giant spear, Lin Li seemed to have found an answer for his doubts. It was the weapon of a giant. What kind of giants would have such a huge body and use such a huge weapon? Even the largest giants of Amril would seem like dwarves compared to this colossal skeleton. Not to mention, this giant could easily crush Amril's giants to death without the use of the spear. The answer was self-evident in relation to the time identified by the time travel spell. During the prehistoric times tens of thousands of years ago, only the Titans, which competed with the ancient wyrms for Amril, had such a huge size. The huge spear was likely to be a legendary weapon used by the Titans, known as the Titan Dragon Spear. Whether it was the spectacular skeleton or the giant spear that was lying quietly on the ground, the shock of it all was indescribable. However, what really made Lin Li agitated was the significance of the two items. Just like ancient wyrms, Titans were born out of chaos at the beginning of the world, and were one of the most powerful races. The High Elves had always been arrogant, and enjoyed comparing themselves to gods. They considered themselves the best of all races, and thanks to their magical genetics, they had had powerful magical powers since birth. The High Elves who carried royal blood would definitely be in the legendary realm. The fact that the efforts put in by most humans to enter the legendary realm often turned out to be futile simply showed that the High Elves undeniably had a reason to be prideful and arrogant. However, the arrogant high elves had never compared themselves to the Titans, because their superior gens were nothing compared to them. Legendary power was nothing to the Titans, who had possessed legendary realm power ever since birth, not to mention most of them advanced to the sanctuary realm during adulthood. The strength of the sanctuary level could no longer be simply described as powerful, as it was already close to the godly level. Even the high elves who had royal blood could not achieve such a feat. High elves who had reached the sanctuary realm were few and far between. The Titan dragon spear, which had only existed in legends, was not only the most powerful weapon of the Titans, but also an important symbol of their reaching adulthood. The Titan dragon spear was not forged from metal or even fused by magic. Instead of calling it a powerful weapon, one might as well call it an extension of the Titans' lives. Every Titan had ability to manipulate lightning. Ever since birth, they had to continuously accumulate the most overwhelming thunder force in the world, and concentrate it in the invincible Titan dragon spear. The power of Thunderbolt at that time was not derived from the elements of the wind, but the origin force that disrupted the chaotic world. Even though they were born with legendary power, the Titans still experienced plenty of dangers that put their lives at risk when collecting the power of Thunderbolt. During the process, no adult Titan could provide assistance, guidance, or protection. It was an origin power that could break through chaos, and even a small portion of it would be overbearing enough to destroy a legendary realm powerhouse instantly. The Thunder Valiant beast, which was said to enjoy soaking in Thunderbolt, would immediately be totally destroyed if it were encounter a tiny morsel of such a power. Putting the formidable magical beasts of the prehistoric times aside, even the powerful WYRMs which were born in chaos together with the Titans were far from comparable to the Thunderbolt, which they dared not touch. However, when collecting the power of Thunderbolt, a Titan first had to introduce the most overbearing power in this world into his own body to refine and strengthen his flesh and bones. Throughout this process, the pain that the Titan needed to endure was far more terrifying than that of Lin Li's heart-piercing potion. They needed a great willpower to fuse their consciousness with Thunderbolt. Even with the power of Titans, not everyone could overcome this level, and every subsequent collection of Thunderbolt's power would be tougher and more dangerous than the one preceding it. The violent power of Thunderbolt had an unrestrained character in the first place, and anyone who wanted to suppress it had to suffer the relentless recoil. The fact that Titans kept the power of Thunderbolt in their blood did not mean that it had completely surrendered. Whenever a new power was introduced, it would trigger a recoil from all of the previously accumulated power. In other words, every accumulation was a life-endangering test of willpower and ability for Titans. The difficulty of the test would also increase exponentially each time. As the Titans grew, the power of Thunderbolt would gradually lose its effect on the Titan's body, while the previously accumulated Thunderbolt in their blood would be gradually subdued by Titan's mighty willpower and become part of their body. During their coming-of-age rituals, the Titans would use the power of Thunderbolt between the heavens and earth to induce all of the power that had been fused with their own willpower and separate Thunderbolt from their bodies, again to form their very own Titan dragon spear. That would be the most thrilling and daunting moment for the Titans. Only by truly overcoming this tough obstacle would they be considered to be genuinely mature. They would then become an adult Titan with sanctuary-level strength. There was a reason for the strength of every powerful existence. It was through such cruel and merciless tests that almost every adult Titan would develop sanctuary-level strength. Hence, the Titan dragon spear formed by the power of Thunderbolt was a symbol of Titans reaching adulthood and their most powerful weapon. Staring at the giant skeleton and spear in front of him, Lin Li subconsciously swallowed his spit. At his current level, ordinary treasures were no longer significant to him, and he would barely be tempted or enticed by advanced magical equipment, rare magical gemstones, and legendary magical crystals. However, what was now right in front of him was the remains of a Titan and what seemed to be a Titan dragon spear. Even a powerhouse of the sanctuary realm would jump at the chance to grab them and declare ownership over the items, let alone Lin Li. As a guru of several major auxiliary professions, Lin Li had a more thorough understanding of the value of those two items as compared to the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm. The figures of the sanctuary realm would probably pay the most attention to the legendary Titan dragon spear, but in Lin Li's eyes, the giant skeleton of the Titan was far more enticing, though he had already kept the remains of the Dragon of Destruction in his ring of endless storm. Although the skeleton of a Titan was not as precious as the remains of the Dragon of Destruction, which was one of the 5 dragon aspects, Lin Li could put the Titan skeleton to great use with his current abilities. The Dragon of Destruction mastered the laws of darkness and laws of destruction, and there were also plenty of dark force and destruction force in its bones. Given Lin Li's current abilities, it would be almost impossible to fully utilize it without any wastage. He could probably only achieve such a feat when he became a divine smith. That was the reason that he had not touched the skeleton of the Dragon of Destruction after such a long time. However, the skeletons of Titans were completely different. Since Lin Li was a smithing guru, he could use them to forge weapons, create strong magic arrays, or build indestructible castles. He could fully utilize it without any wastage. However, after confirming that it was the skeleton of a Titan, the first thing that popped up in Lin Li's mind was that the Black Front Fortress was finally going to be completed. Lin Li and the necromancer Sendros had once spent some time together in the Blackstone Mountains. After seeing that Lin Li had brought Death Knights out from the Scar of Death, he decided to give Lin Li the design sketch of Black Front Fortress that he had been keeping for a long time. Black Front Fortress was a type of barracks that was specially designed for Death Knights. It could transform mana into Death Aura, and when a Death Knight was placed in the fortress, it could not only continuously strengthen its physical strength, it could also speed up the digestion of the soul fire. Actually, this advantage applied to other undead creatures too. After Lin Li became a legendary mage, the battles that he faced were on a whole new level, and the Death Knights did not have the right to join in at all. Be it the Alchemy Colossus, which was almost legendary, or the Crimson Dragon from the Underground Palace, neither of them was something a Death Knight could match, what more the Elemental WYRM's projected avatar. The army of Death Knights could destroy everything without saving anything for Lin Li. Although Lin Li was no saint, he could not bring himself to do something so ruthless like the Retribution Knight Rodhart. It was impossible for him to use the entire spirit power of the breezy plains to enhance his strength. In fact, he had almost forgotten about the army of Death Knights, which he had arranged to be situated in the mountains near the Tower of Dusk where they could roam around. Actually, Lin Li had been keeping the design sketch of the Black Front Fortress for some time now, and he had never once taken action, because it was way too difficult to find the suitable materials. If the Titan skeleton was used to build the Black Front Fortress, the benefits would definitely outweigh the cost of the materials mentioned in the design sketches. The Titans had the power to control Thunderbolt, and their bodies had also been tempered by Thunderbolt. The power of Thunderbolt within their bones was not that of the evolved Thunderbolt. Instead, it was the power of Thunderbolt in its purest form that existed when the world began. A Black Front Fortress built using the Titan skeleton would not only provide an immense amount of power of death, but also allow the Death Knight to possess the power of Thunderbolt. Undead creatures were the most afraid of holy light, it was their Achilles heel. However, if the undead creatures could possess the power of Thunderbolt, it would give them greater resistance to holy light. Soul fire that had been cleansed by Thunderbolt would become pure and much more powerful. Perhaps the Death Knights might just break through their natural limits and grow to become true Retribution Knights. Lin Li thought, Rodhart is nothing. I'll bring out 16 Retribution Knights in one go. By then, I shall see what you can do. Lin Li burst into laughter at the thought of 16 Retribution Knights assembling together. He reckoned that even a legendary figure like Rodhart would not be able to stand strong against the Retribution Knights. Lin Li gradually began to come up with a plan and ideas how to put the Titan skeleton to good use. However, he did not quite know what to do about the Titan Dragon Spear. The purest power of Thunderbolt that was concentrated in the Titan Dragon Spear was the power that first broke the world of chaos. It was so strong that even an ancient WYRM wouldn't be able to resist it. Even the Helios scepter that Lin Li was wielding couldn't be compared with such a powerful weapon. However, the problem was that the Titan Dragon Spear was a proprietary weapon of the Titans, and every Titan Dragon Spear could only be used by its rightful owner. Hence, outsiders obviously couldn't use them either. Due to the fact that the Titan Dragon Spear was an extension of a Titan's life, It contained the power of the thunderbolt that had been accumulated after every near-death experience. After such a process, the dragon gun and the titan had become connected by blood. When one was damaged, the other would be affected as well. Once the titan died, his titan dragon spear would also lose its life. Even if it had been preserved, it was nothing more than just a lifeless shell, which no longer possessed the terrifying power it had had during the prehistoric age. However, Lin Li was not one who dwelt on issues, and it didn't matter even if he couldn't use the titan dragon spear now. Although the titan dragon spear had lost its life, the sheer thunderbolt power of the titan dragon spear did not disappear, and was merely dormant. Lin Li knew that what was detected by the mana detector just now was the formidable mana that came from the titan dragon spear. So long as Lin Li found a suitable method, he would be able to awaken and activate the infinite power contained in it. Thunderbolt, which was one of the pieces of the debris of the stars, was undoubtedly the best choice for awakening that power. Lin Li heaved a sigh of relief and suppressed all of his excitement. It was not the time to think about those matters yet. Most importantly, he had to think about how to bring the titan dragon spear and titan skeleton away. There was infinite space in Lin Li's ring of endless storm, and he could even store the remains of the dragon of destruction in it. Although the titan skeleton was huge, it wouldn't cause a space constraint. However, Lin Li had another issue to consider before placing the two items in the ring of endless storm, and that was the legendary titan spirit. In the world that Lin Li had lived in before he teleported, there had always been a great debate about the existence of spirits. Of course, the majority felt that there were no souls in humans and no afterlife. However, in the magical world of Amril, everyone acknowledged the existence of spirits. It was said that since the Dark Age, high elves, humans, other intelligent races, and even magical beasts, which had no wisdom, would become spirits after death. However, there was no conclusion about what form spirits would take, hence, there were varying opinions. The necromancer Sendros was the only one who could be considered to be experienced and learned in spirits. After all, necromancers often communicated with spirits. Lin Li and Sendros had once discussed necromagic, and the topic of spirits was naturally unavoidable. Sendros had been asking Lin Li regarding some knowledge on pharmacy, hence, he obviously wouldn't refuse to answer Lin Li's questions. However, even as a master necromancer, Sendros could not give Lin Li an exact answer, and had merely told him some of his conjectures. In Amril, some of the more authoritative statements about the form of the spirits suggested that the soul might fall into eternal sleep or completely vanish after death. It might even become resentful ghouls. Of course, there was also a possibility of being swallowed by undead creatures that used the spiritual force to enhance their own power. However, Sendros also mentioned that before the Dark Age, it was said that ancient Wyrms and Titans would not return to their spiritual states after death. After the death of a Titan, their strong willpower that had been fused with Thunderbolt would be concentrated into a spirit and stored in the Pantheon. On the other hand, after an ancient Wyrm died, its willpower and mental strength would both be concentrated in the dragon's spirit and placed in the dragon's graveyard in endless time and space. However, Sendros had no idea where the Pantheon and the dragon's graveyard were and what they looked like. In fact, even the three sanctuary figures of the Supreme Council probably wouldn't know the answer to this question. In short, no matter where the spirit or dragon's spirit went in the end, they definitely wouldn't vanish. In fact, this statement was not surprising. Ancient Wyrms and Titans were born out of chaos, and were powerful races that were born when the world began. During the growth of the Titans, they had to continue to strengthen their bodies and willpower with the power of the Thunderbolt. Their willpower was probably already extremely terrifying. Lin Li was worried about encountering the Titan spirit here. Although it was said that the Titan spirit would return to Pantheon, this was definitely an exceptional case because the Titan Dragon Spear contained both the power of Thunderbolt and the Titan's massive willpower. When the Titan died, he would become a spirit, and the Titan Dragon Spear would reintegrate into the spirit and protect its partner in another form after entering Pantheon. Although the Titan Dragon Spear in front of him had lost its life, it still showed no sign of dissipating. That could only mean one thing: the Titan was extremely out of luck, for its spirit did not even get a chance to enter the pantheon after death. Hence, the Titan dragon spear naturally had no chance to be incorporated into the spirit either. If there was really a Titan spirit in it, well, no one would be generous enough to let someone else covet his skeleton and weapon. An adult Titan basically had power above level 25, thus making them possess sanctuary level power. Although the Titan spirits have lost their strong physical bodies and the Titan dragon spear that contained the power of Thunderbolt, their strong willpower that had been fused with Thunderbolt's power ever since they were born allowed their spirits to become formidable even by the standards of undead creatures. Lin Li was just a minor legendary mage. Although he was an outstanding figure among human beings, he was just as insignificant as an ant in front of a Titan spirit that was at least level 25. Even if there were 10 of him, he might not be able to stand against the Titan spirit with the help of the Manhwa family and the 4 legendary powerhouses of Dark Blade. However, despite being faced with the possibility of facing a mighty opponent, Lin Li did not leave in dejection. Instead, he began to take out some precious magic items from the Ring of Endless Storm. If it had been a living Titan, Lin Li would have run away and hidden far, far away without hesitation. However, no matter how powerful the Titan spirit was, it was already considered an undead creature which Lin Li felt that he could deal with. Of course, he had to hope that the Titan spirit was really an undead creature. The baby elemental Wyrm, Xiaohua, already had the 2 magic crystals, and was now hovering with translucent wings that allowed it to remain suspended in midair while its head swayed back and forth. It watched Lin Li run about in the cave. Wyrms and Titans were natural enemies, and their relationship had been strained since the birth of their races. Although Xiaohua was just born, the memory that it had gained from the projected avatar made it well aware how powerful the Titan was. If it were the Dragon of Dream, Xiaohua obviously wouldn't be intimidated by an ordinary Titan, but the Titan was still too powerful for it now. It stayed at the entrance of the cave without touching anything there while staring at Lin Li curiously in a bid to see how the human mage was going to deal with the Titan that was tens of thousands of times larger than it. The cave was extremely spacious, and Lin Li seemed rather tiny compared to the Titan dragon spear and the Titan skeleton. In a short while a large ring appeared on the ground, encircling the Titan skeleton and the Titan dragon spear. Although it was just a simple ring, Lin Li's heart was bleeding when he was drawing it. He truly felt the pinch because the materials used did not come cheap, and were formulated using various precious magical materials. Every handful of them came at a sky-high price. It was all just the beginning. Such a simple drawing of a circle was obviously not enough to deal with the Titan spirit. Lin Li had never once paused in his actions, and he continuously used the huge ring as a basis to draw complex patterns. He occasionally placed some precious magical materials in specific positions too. Lin Li continuously drew various complicated patterns, such as crisscrossing lines, curvy waves, and small symbols with significant meanings. The large circle was continuously enhanced, and the faint magic light emitted by the colorful magical materials gradually made it seem like a piece of art. However, it was unlike a freestyle art piece, because Lin Li had to ensure the accuracy of each line, and the structure of each symbol could not be the slightest bit wrong. Well, it was not a work of art, but a huge alchemy circle. Any mistake would lead to the failure of the alchemy circle, and any deviation could make the alchemy circle fail to achieve the desired effect. Drawing such a huge alchemy circle was a great test for all alchemists, and even a veteran alchemist wouldn't dare to guarantee that he wouldn't make a mistake during the process. It was perhaps not the most complicated alchemy matrix, but its sheer size would make its formulation difficult beyond imagination. If Lin Li wanted to fight the powerful Titan spirit, it would not be enough to just rely on his own strength. Even if he went through the painful experience of ingesting the heart-piercing potion again, he would still face death when he encountered the level 25 Titan spirit. However, Lin Li was not just a mage or a pharmacist. Hence, he thought of the alchemy array. The power of wisdom was infinite. In terms of individual power, humans and the high elves of the Dark Age would never be able to compare to the strong and overbearing magical beasts. Yet, the magical beasts were the ones that got driven out of Anril, and those who remained to rule the world were the relatively weaker high elves. That was the power of wisdom. When the wise were unable to break through their own limitations, they earned to use external forces such as various magical equipment, potions, magewefts, alchemy arrays, and many others, with the smallest being magical rings and the biggest being sky castles. That gave the power of the intelligent races unlimited growth potential. Lin Li would never be able to fight the Titans with his own individual abilities. However, he did not lack help from external factors. Step by step, Lin Li carefully completed the huge alchemy circle. The plethora of magical materials exuded a mild yet vibrant magical glow, which gradually gave the entire cave a beautiful silhouette. The large alchemy array was a great test for Lin Li as well. It was huge, not because it was simply enlarged, and there were actually various problems that had to be addressed as well. For example, some magic symbols couldn't withstand greater power output, so they needed to be replaced with smaller alchemy arrays. There were also some magical that couldn't withstand the flow of too much power, and certain methods had to be employed in order to enhance them. Lin Li had to use his own knowledge to solve the issues one by one. After a long time, Lin Li looked down and carefully scrutinized his own masterpiece whilst suspended in midair. The huge alchemy array had already been completed, and the colorful magical glow was shining brightly to form beautiful patterns. The numerous magic symbols intertwined together in a complicated manner. It was absolutely perfect, whether it was perceived as an alchemy array or an art piece. However, what Lin Li wanted was not a work of art, but an alchemy circle that could help him defend himself against the mighty Titan spirit. After thinking for a while, Lin Li returned to the alchemy array and retrieved the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark, which he then used to replace the magical items in the alchemy array. The debris of the stars were genuine artifacts that possessed incredible power. Unfortunately, Lin Li's current abilities did not allow him to fully exert their power. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to rely on the alchemy, and could have just used the debris of the stars to fight the Titan spirit. At this point, the alchemy circle could be considered complete, but Lin Li did not stop frowning at all, because there was still a crucial problem that had not been resolved. If the problem was not eliminated, everything that Lin Li had done and the huge alchemy array, which required plenty of precious materials, would very likely go to waste. The problem was actually very simple, but solving it was the difficult part. The issue was the mana source for the alchemy array. This huge alchemy circle was already the strongest one known to Lin Li. At the same time, its demand for mana was naturally not comparable to general alchemy circles. In fact, even a legendary magical crystal would be completely drained in the blink of an eye when used as a mana source. Compared to ordinary magical crystals, the legendary magical crystals not only contained more mana, they also could automatically replenish the depleted mana. However, if the rate of replenishment couldn't keep up with the speed of consumption, the mana would be depleted, and the legendary magical crystal would be rendered useless. Even though Lin Li was wealthy, he couldn't waste a legendary magical crystal like that. It was practically a crime. Moreover, the alchemy circle needed more than just a legendary magical crystal. After all, he had to deal with a Titan spirit that was likely to be level 25 or above. It would be absurd to think that a legendary magical crystal was enough. Without a source of mana, the alchemy circle would be nothing but a bunch of meaningless symbols, no matter how advanced they might be. What else could act as the mana source apart from legendary magical crystals? Lin Li could not bear to use his assets as a mana source, but the ones that he was willing to use were not up to standard. After giving it some thought, he suddenly noticed Xiaohua, the baby elemental Wyrm, at the entrance. Although Xiaohua had just been born, and was not as powerful as the adult elemental Wyrms, its talent was still unaffected. With the mastery of the laws of the four elements, it could freely cast magic without worrying about the exhaustion of mana. How about making it the mana source for the alchemy circle? Lin Li felt that the method should be feasible. The elemental Wyrm, just like a converter that could convert magic elements into the mana required by the alchemy. At the same time, the speed and amount of this conversion were almost unlimited. That way, there would be a source of mana for the alchemy circle without having to sacrifice legendary magic crystals. He could also guarantee that the effects would be best. What was not to love? However, there was another problem he had to face. How was he supposed to make Xiaohua obediently become the source of mana? Lin Li walked towards the elemental Wyrm and spoke to it while gesturing with his hands to make Xiaohua follow him to the mana fountain. However, Xiaohua quit when Lin Li was about to move it to position. Xiaohua seemed to have forgotten that it had just swallowed 2 magical crystals. It rubbed its little belly with a front limb, and put on a pitiful look which made it seem as if it had been starving for years. Then, it stretched out a paw towards Lin Li. Obviously, it was asking for a magical crystal again, and this time, it could not be satiated with just 1 or 2 magical crystals. Instead, it clearly wanted 4 magical crystals all at once as 4 of its fingers were extended. Lin Li thought that it would be better to take out 4 magic crystals than to let a legendary magic crystal go to waste. As long as Xiaohua obediently acted as the source of magic in order for the alchemy array to exert the most complete effects, the Titan Dragon Spear and the Titan Skeleton could be considered his. Compared to the 4 magical crystals, it was a much better gain. However, just as Lin Li was about to agree, Xiaohua suddenly retracted his front paw. It then raised its claws in front of Lin Li and scrutinized them before glancing at Lin Li again. It then lay down on the ground and raised all its limbs while rolling about. Damn it! Lin Li cussed and thought to himself, does this little thing find its claws to be too small to grasp magical crystals? By raising 4 limbs, it probably wants 16 magical crystals. Tickle me, the baby elemental Wyrm exclaimed gleefully. Lin Li had been benefiting from others ever since he arrived in Amrel. However, it was his turn to benefit someone else this time. In fact, if Lin Li could pile all the magical crystals in his collection to nurture a dragon of dream, Lin Li wouldn't be stingy about giving out his crystals. After all, the dragon of dream was extremely powerful. However, the issue was that Lin Li would never be able to let Xiaohua mature into an adult even if he were to give all of his magical crystals to it. Besides, the role of a baby elemental Wyrm would be too restricted and limited in the impending disaster. Lin Li squatted down and poked the elemental Wyrm's belly. Tickle, the elemental Wyrm muttered in shock. Lin Li took out a light blue magical crystal from his ring. It was a level 19 magical crystal that he had obtained by killing the Thunder Valiant beast. He waved the magical crystal at Xiaohua, after which he pointed at the magical crystal and extended a finger to Xiaohua. He meant that the level 19 magical crystal would be the reward. The baby elemental Wyrm licked its mouth and appeared to be salivating, but it did not agree immediately. Instead, it stood up and extended its claws, hinting that it wanted 8 of the level 19 magical crystals. Lin Li had encountered all sorts of sly and unethical merchants before. Although he might not be able to really deal with the old and sly foxes, he was certain that he could deal with a baby elemental Wyrm. He immediately put the magical crystal back inside his ring, after which he picked Xiaohua up and cast it towards the side, trying to say, I can't afford to use you. I'll leave you alone, alright? The elemental Wyrm had no idea that Lin Li would not be able to come up with a more suitable source of magic power for the huge alchemy array apart from itself. Thinking that Lin Li really didn't want to use it anymore, it frantically flew to Lin Li and nodded eagerly while calling him and staring at him with puppy eyes and a pitiful look. Lin Li was amused. Although it had inherited some of the memories from the projected avatar, it was still way too incompetent at pulling tricks and playing mind games. Instead of answering immediately, Lin Li pulled a long face and pushed Xiaohua towards the side firmly. Xiaohua was just a newly born elemental Wyrm which obviously had no idea how sinister and evil the world could be. If it were that conscious, the Dragon of Dream along with the ancient Wyrms would have long dictated the world of Amrel. What could possibly happen when a thick-skinned person met an even more thick-skinned one? Xiaohua decided to cling tightly onto Lin Li's finger, refusing to let go. Lin Li suppressed his laughter, and pointed at the position that he was in just now. Full of anger and indignant feelings, Xiaohua quietly returned to its initial position. However, Lin Li obviously didn't want to push Xiaohua over the edge, hence, he grabbed a level 10 magical crystal and cast it at Xiaohua. He then grabbed another level 19 magical crystal and level 17 magical crystal. Pointing at them, he said, "Work properly. Once you make me satisfied, these 2 magical crystals will be yours." Although Xiaohua had no idea what Lin Li was saying, it could understand his gestures. Hence, it immediately stuffed the magical crystal into its mouth and nodded at Lin Li. He finally solved the issue of finding a magic source of the huge alchemy array. The never-ending magic of the elemental Wyrm was enough for this huge alchemy array to exert its power to the maximum. Lin Li checked the alchemy array again, and turned to look at Xiaohua, who was moving together with him. It seemed he would have to research and develop a stronger alchemy array or ManhwaRecap to deal with it from now on. After everything was prepared, Lin Li launched the alchemy array, and the magical materials with different colors gradually became brighter under the infusion of massive magic. Lin Li walked to the Titan Dragon Spear, suppressed his excitement, and slowly extended his hand. Just like Lin Li had expected, there was an abrupt and massive change in the cave when Lin Li touched the giant Titan Dragon Spear. An immense power as vast as the boundless sea suddenly descended on the cave, making Lin Li feel rather small. The force was intense and hot, completely devoid of the gloominess and coldness that should be present in ghouls. The initially vast mountain seemed so narrow and oppressive because of the force. "Lowly elves, you shall pay for everything that you have done. All of the other elves will die together with you, and the fury of the pantheon will turn everything into ash." The force emerged with a loud and furious roar, which caused the entire valley to slip into tremors. It was as if it was going to collapse and crumble any time. Lin Li knew that he had guessed correctly. There was indeed a Titan spirit which had yet to enter the pantheon existing in the cave together with the Titan Dragon Spear and the Titan skeleton. A shadow suddenly appeared in the initially empty and hollow cave, and the huge roar resounded like thunder. At that moment, Lin Li was overwhelmed with an unprecedented pressure which was far greater than the one Vidas, a level 22 mage, had imposed on him. It was even comparable to the real dragon of destruction from the endless world. In the face of this pressure, Lin Li felt like he was extremely tiny and insignificant, with a tinge of despair. What was there to resist? Could he even resist it? Legendary mages were nothing but a joke when compared to this force. When the feeling of despair spread quickly through his mind like wildfire, Lin Li no longer tried to resist, and there was a sudden outburst of tenacity and mental strength. Lin Li's eyes began to turn a little clearer, and he seemed to have become another person. He had no choice but to admit that Juresco really did deserve the title of the God of Mages. The mental strength training method written in the Book of Eternity really benefited Lin Li. Although Lin Li had a flair for magic, his mental strength was far beyond that of ordinary humans. However, if he had not practiced using the training method written in the Book of Eternity, he would have really given up by now. The Titan spirit was still present, but Lin Li's mental strength was extremely strong. Despite being shaken by the massive storm, he never once gave in. At this moment, he had already understood that the massive pressure that made one feel like they were on the verge of despair was a powerful mental attack. Lin Li stood still. He clenched his jaw and turned pale, but he still exhibited tenacity. Blood began to flow slowly out of the corners of his eyes and mouth, but his strong grit and willpower were still shown in his eyes. Why were Titans still so strong after losing their bodies and weapons? It was because of their unyielding will that had been developed after they experienced the thunderbolt. So what if it's a Titan spirit? So what if it's level 25? It's just an unlucky creature that didn't even manage to get to Pantheon, Lin Li thought. The Titan Dragon Spear is right here. You would have long killed me if you could use it. Go ahead and use it. A member of the heavenly race that was born in chaos? Didn't you end up in this horrendous place too? Lin Li continuously tried to strengthen his willpower to retaliate against the Titan spirit. The Titan spirit roared angrily, and the whole mountain trembled. It could not help but be angry at the fact that the tiny and insignificant Lin Li actually could persevere under his strong mental pressure. It was the greatest insult to the mighty titans. Lin Li shuddered slightly, but it was not because of fear, but the result of the tightening of his muscles in his entire body. Although his mental strength was weak under the overwhelming mental pressure, he still remained determined, without wavering at all. I shall persist and show you what I'm made of. Lin Li had pinned all of his hopes on the massive alchemy array that he had set up previously. With the huge gap in power, a strong willpower alone was not enough. That dash of hope was the best drive and motivation for him to press on. Time passed second after second, and Lin Li felt like his mental strength had already been pushed to its maximum. The level 25 Titan spirit indeed could not be resisted simply with unwavering willpower. However, at this moment, a sacred song and bell full of holy aura sounded in the middle of the mountain valley all of a sudden. It became increasingly louder, seemingly not affected by the power of the Titan spirit. The Titan spirit roared again, his voice filled with anger and reluctance, though he was soon overshadowed by the sacred song which drowned his roar out. The violent power of the Titan spirit seemed like snow that was gradually melting away in the sun. You thought you were immortal, but you still died with your dynasty. After a final roar, the Titan spirit disappeared. At this moment, the sacred song and bell began to turn softer after the climax, while the alchemy array gradually turned dim. Lin Li finally breathed a long sigh of relief, stretched out a trembling hand, and wiped the blood off of his face while his body swayed and rocked. Although it was just a confrontation and battle of power, it still made Lin Li feel weak. The massive mental strength and attack were enough to crush any confident spirit. The light of the alchemy array had been completely extinguished, and the precious magical materials used to arrange it had also lost their luster. At this juncture, they no longer possessed any value. Feeling like it had done its job, Xiaohua immediately scurried towards Lin Li without his permission. It seemed to have failed to realize how dangerous the situation earlier had been. It simply extended its claws towards Lin Li and asked for its reward. Feeling amused, Lin Li retrieved 2 magical crystals from his ring and cast them at Xiaohua, who was wagging its tail and salivating. Xiaohua cheered, and went to the side to chew on the magical crystals, while Lin Li stared at the Titan skeleton and the Titan dragon spear. Looking at the alchemy array that had no longer any value, Lin Li thought to himself, how overwhelming. It was a level 25 Titan spirit. If it weren't for the fact that he knew about the alchemy array, he probably would not even be able to protect himself, let alone win the battle. The massive alchemy array was not just gigantic, but also complicated. It was a genuine guru-level alchemy array that might not be set up by anyone else in the entire Amril. It was the only alchemy array that could turn mana into divine power that Lin Li knew. The bells and songs of this divine power could suppress all evil in the world, and it was known as Requiem Array. It was said that even Rodhart, the Retribution Knight, fell under the Requiem song of the prophet Willin. There was a holy bell on top of the brilliant shrine, and it was said that holy light of the church would be invincible with such a Requiem Array. Once any evil creature approached, it'd be overshadowed by the divine bell. Lin Li created the Requiem Array based on the theory and principles of Requiem. As long as there was enough mana, similar effects could be achieved, and he could also use it to deal with the Retribution Knight. Comment. The only disadvantage was that in the process of conversion, the loss of magic power would be unavoidable and excessive. The 90% loss directly resulted in a terrible and horrifying depletion of mana that would be consumed by the alchemy array. Even if a legendary magical crystal was placed in it, it would be depleted the instant that the Requiem began. In Amril, probably only an extraordinary existence like the elemental Wyrm could possess that much mana and be able to sustain the Requiem. In fact, the baby elemental Wyrm, Xiaohua, could even continue wagging its tail and relentlessly ask Lin Li for some magical crystals after such a massive depletion. Lin Li turned his head and looked at Xiaohua that had wiped out the level 17 magical crystal and was now holding onto the level 19 Thunder Valiant Beast's magical crystal, licking it like it was a large sugar cube. Lin Li shook his head in amusement, and walked towards the alchemy array. He first put away holy light and gloomy dark, before looking for some magical materials that he could use again. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Although Lin Li obtained victory in the end and obtained the Titan skeleton as well as the Titan dragon spear, he was a little more doubtful. How could such a strong and powerful level 25 Titan end up in this place? Even a figure of the sanctuary realm probably would be no match for it. Before the Titan spirit was subdued, why did it roar twice? The High Elves were only born during the Dark Age, and logically speaking, they should not have anything to do with the Titans. The Titans were destroyed way before Elves emerged. You thought you were immortal, but you still died with your dynasty. Could it be the immortal king? If that was the case, the Titan here might not have been an ordinary one. None of those who were affiliated with the immortal king were simple. Lin Li immediately shook his head again, to deny his own guess. It was said that the immortal king was born together with the Tree of Eternity, which was born because of the destruction of the Titans and the ancient Wyrms. It did not fit the chronological order at all. The gigantic Titan skeleton and the Titan dragon spear were finally kept in the Ring of Endless Storm, belonging to Lin Li. There were now more questions in Lin Li's mind, though. What other secrets concerning the prehistoric times were there? Recalling the thrilling experience that he had previously and the formidable pressure of the Titan spirit, Lin Li glanced at the now empty mountain. The stark contrast seemed surreal. Lin Li did not wish to waste any more time on these doubts. There were plenty of questions that could not be answered just based on guesses. He could only find out about the past when he reached a certain level. Lin Li touched the ring on his finger, and his lips curled up in a gratifying smile. So far, he had already obtained major gains that others would go crazy over. However, the adventure had yet to end. Compared to such a huge gain, even the precious magical materials used to set up the Requiem array were worth wasting. There might likely never be another Titan skeleton in the entire Anril. The legendary powerful Titan dragon spear was even more precious, because it should have returned to the pantheon together with the Titan spirit. He wondered how the Manhwa family and Dark Blade were doing outside the cave. Given the power and abilities of the two families, which had 4 legendary masters, the magical beasts probably wouldn't cause too much trouble for them. Lin Li did not feel embarrassed about secretly leaving the battlefield. Be it the projected avatar of the elemental Wyrm or the Titan spirit at the sanctuary realm, Lin Li would still have had to solve everything himself at the end of the day. It was not that he was looking down on the 4 legendary masters, but rather that those creatures could not be dealt with by normal people. Although the projected avatar of the elemental Wyrm had yet to reach the sanctuary realm, the infinite mana could not be balanced even by the combined power of Cheyenne and Borg. Not to mention, the other was a sanctuary-level Titan spirit, which was enough to destroy the entire adventurer team. The reason why Lin Li made gains in the end was that he had grasped and targeted the weaknesses of his opponents. At the same time, the price he'd paid was also unbearable by normal people's standards. Heart-piercing potions were master-level potions, which were extremely scarce in Anril. Even with materials available, it was unlikely that anyone would be able to formulate them. The Guru-level alchemy array was also rare in Anril, where alchemy was insufficiently developed. No pain, no gain. Since it was all achieved through Lin Li's efforts, there would be no point in letting the other 2 parties join in. At the thought of gains, Lin Li could not help but look at the young Xiao Hua flying around happily in front of him. It was a super treasure, which should be considered the greatest gain of this trip. Although it was not that strong yet, and was in fact rather lazy, it was of great use to Lin Li, especially with arranging the Requiem array. Ever since then, Lin Li had more thoughts about it. The Requiem array was a Guru-level alchemy array which could not be supported by a legendary realm magical crystal. Even a magical crystal at the peak of the legendary level would probably be directly sucked dry. However, now that he had the elemental Wyrm, which had the ability to instantly convert magic elements of the world into mana to make the alchemy array run in its best state, it was akin to having an infinite source of mana. The Guru-level alchemy arrays, ManhwaRecap, and crafts that required the support of a super mana source that Lin Li had dreamed of employing previously all seemed to become usable now. Xiaohua flew towards Lin Li and continuously flapped its colorful wings while holding on to the level 19 magical crystal, which it occasionally took a bite out of. It then cheered and wagged its tail heartlessly, clearly clueless about the fact that it had already been deemed a magical crystal mine that could fly in Lin Li's eyes. It was still cheering and rejoicing that it had obtained the magical crystal. Upon arriving at the exit of the crack, Lin Li looked far into the Haiga mountain range and caught sight of the Dragon Mountains. There was still a natural magical domain there that was waiting for him to collect, as well as the Retribution Knight that he was once afraid of. Staring at the mountains that had already been destroyed, Lin Li knew that it was time for him to head back. Although the successive adventures was subject to the abilities of each individual, and Lin Li did not feel that he was wrong in leaving beforehand, he was still in cooperation with the two other parties. The adventure had yet to end, and they still had to continue working with each other. However, there was of course no need to let them know about what he had gained. The Titan Skeleton and Titan Dragon Spear were already put away in the Ring of Endless Storm, which was impenetrable to others' eyes. However, Xiaohua was giving Lin Li a headache. Although there were barely any people in this world who could recognize elemental WYRMS, he would definitely arouse the suspicion and draw the attention of the four legendary figures if he were to bring it back with him. Lin Li could not come up with a good idea at the moment, hence, he decided to grab Xiaohua and stuff it into his loose and spacious magical robe, regardless of its objections. Fortunately, it was a newborn, and Lin Li could still manage to fit it inside his robe while concealing its menace of the dragon. Otherwise, it would be tough handling it. Perhaps because Xiaohua was too loud when it woke up, the powerful magical beasts all vanished, and Lin Li did not encounter any obstructions along the way. After leaving the valley, Lin Li zipped through the dense trees, and soon returned to where he left off. The environment gradually began to look more run down. Clearly, the adventurer team had gone through a massive battle during the time when he was absent. Lin Li landed on the tree and shoved Xiaohua back inside his robe. He then looked into the distance and realized that there were traces of magical attacks everywhere, the corpses of magical beasts and humans, the pleas of the injured, some kind souls looking after the wounded, and some others who were cleaning up unhurriedly. Clearly, the adventurer team had suffered a major loss and damage even though there were four legendary powerhouses with them. Lin Li whipped out a magical crystal and stuffed it inside his magical robe. Upon hearing the chirping and cheering of Xiaohua, he quickly landed on the ground and walked towards the campground. Soon, a dark shadow swooped towards them. It turned out to be Norfeller, who had remained in the battlefield. Upon sight of Lin Li, Norfeller kept a straight face and handed him a bag of magical crystals without hesitation. It seemed he had still loyally followed Lin Li's orders during the intense battle. He had made plenty of gains, but there were no signs of injuries on him at all. It seemed he had just gone through an effortless process of hunting. He also noticed that everyone else around him had turned pale. The others were all thinking to themselves that Lin Li and Norfeller were both extremely thick-skinned to have taken away all of the magical crystals without contributing anything while leaving others to fight the magical beasts painstakingly. Lin Li was not at all bothered by the peculiar gazes that were cast on him. It was as if he did not have any feelings at all. He walked towards the campground while asking Norfeller about the battle that took place earlier on. Although the Manhwa family and Dark Blade obtained the final victory in the fierce battle, it did not come easy for them. Both parties lost some of their strong members, most of whom were level 17 and level 18, and could definitely be regarded as the elites of the two forces. That should be good news for Lin Li. After all, although the three parties were cooperating, the Tower of Dusk belonging to Lin Li seemed to be the weakest. Hence, the power disparity had to be balanced by the magical beasts. Entering the campground, Lin Li shoved another magical crystal into his magic robe to quiet down the little one in his arms. He then looked up to see that Cheyenne and Borg were both giving out orders to their underlings. The two legendary mages seemed to be a little disheveled at this moment. Although they were not injured, they were clearly fatigued. They obviously had had a hard time winning the tough battle. Instead of stepping forward to talk to them, Lin Li simply greeted them, and returned to his own tent without feeling any guilt at all. Besides, he still had an elemental wyrm in his arms. The most important thing to do now was to put the little one in place, lest he had to constantly feed it with magical crystals to placate it. Watching Lin Li walk into the tent, the old rivals Cheyenne and Borg looked at each other while smiling wryly and shaking their heads in unison. At this moment, the two of them had the same idea. They both thought that Lin Li, the young legendary mage, had the thickest skin ever. Despite being one of the allies, not only did he not put in any effort during the battle, he even took advantage of them and grabbed a ton of magical crystals, causing them to suffer heavy losses. Yet, they could not voice their unhappiness. What else could they say? There were only 2 people from the Tower of Dusk, and they would not have been of any significant help during the fierce and chaotic battle just now anyway. Although Cheyenne and Borg were legendary masters, each of them was faced with strong opponents. It was impossible to pay attention to where the people of the Tower of Dusk were and what they were doing during the battle. Although Lin Li did not seem to have provided much help, he actually contributed by killing the magical beasts, and thus gained an impressive number of level 17 and level 18 magical crystals. Even if he did take advantage, no one would dare to berate him. Most importantly, he had the crucial leads to the treasure of the Immortal King. Even if the other forces had the evidence, they wouldn't dare to turn against him. The 2 leaders of the strongest forces in the breezy plains had no choice but to silently lament having such a lousy ally. They had no idea if they should cry or laugh. Lin Li was not bothered by whatever others thought about him. Instead, he ordered Norfeller to wait outside the tent while he entered and released the elemental wyrm. He was now considering how to settle it down. Even if the cooperation was over, he couldn't possibly leave Xiaohua outside. Yes, there were definitely only a few people in Anril who could recognize elemental wyrms, but Lin Li could not guarantee that no one would be able to recognize Xiaohua. Anril was large, and although there were only a few strong figures of the sanctuary realm, no one knew if there were any seniors who might recognize an elemental wyrm. Even Cheyenne and Borg could sense Xiaohua's value, despite being unable to recognize an elemental wyrm if they saw him. Lin Li knew that he should never flaunt his wealth. With his current power, he still could not afford to be dauntless just yet. Finding a place to put Xiaohua in was an issue for Lin Li. Although he had the Ring of Endless Storm, which almost had infinite space, even the ancient Kanoris could not stand it, let alone a young elemental wyrm with a lively and resilient character. Who was he supposed to hold liable if Xiaohua ended up developing a mental illness? Lin Li pondered for a moment, and suddenly raised an eyebrow as an idea popped up in his mind. He used his mental strength to search the Ring of Endless Storm, and a ring soon appeared on his palm. The ring was made of ethereal gold, and it was inlaid with a huge black gemstone. The gemstone did not have much of a magical wave, but its gloomy glow was tempting enough. For Lin Li, the ring did have a long history that dated all the way back to when he had yet to arrive in Anril, when Lin Li was running his own mineral veins in the Thousand Pinnacles forest of the Endless World. He spent a bomb to obtain the ring. In the Endless World, the ring had a special and pleasant name, Dream Garden. It could be said to be one of the most precious rings in Endless World that Lin Li had spent half his assets on. However, if it was just to enhance his strength, Dream Garden would not be powerful enough. It'd not even be as good as Lin Li's Robe of Wrath. After all, the Robe of Wrath contained plenty of low-level magic in addition to the plentiful scroll slots. Dream Garden would be completely useless during a battle, for its only use was to create a unique space that was no different from the outside world. In the space, the 7 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, light, darkness, and chaos were all readily available. There were also mountains, water, trees, and flowers. Except for the fact that life couldn't be truly nurtured there, everything in that space was no different from the outside world. Moreover, the world in Dream Garden was definitely not comparable to the infinite and deadly dimensional space of the Ring of Endless Storm. When Lin Li had got the Dream Garden, he once entered it to take a look. It was just like a paradise on earth, and he could not bear to leave it at all. At that time, Lin Li had initially wanted to use the ring to transport his mineral ores. Unfortunately, both the Flash Plains and Thousand Pinnacles were located on the edge of the Endless World, and were extremely dilapidated and barren. Even if Lin Li had had countless private veins, it would have been impossible to turn them into profit immediately. Fortunately, Lin Li had not only found a teleportation portal that allowed him to travel to Bright Moon City, he also found some rare dimensional equipment in the auction house. However, the only flaw of Dream Garden was that the space was too unstable. It was as beautiful as a paradise on Earth, just like its name suggested. It was like a fantasy that was exceptionally beautiful, but a slight fluctuation in energy would cause the entire world to collapse. Because of this, treasures like Dream Garden were used by Lin Li for transporting ores. After he got the Ring of Endless Storm, he completely stopped using it. Lin Li only remembered it when he was in the Haiga mountain range. As far as the environment was concerned, the Dream Garden was undoubtedly the most suitable for Xiao Hua to thrive in. Although Xiao Hua was the descendant of the Dragon of Dream, it probably had never enjoyed such a beautiful abode before. Lin Li suddenly recalled that his little dragon Hawk could live in there too. Little Dragon Hawk was gradually growing up and absorbing the mana of the legendary magical crystals every single day. The speed of his growth was truly shocking and amazing. When Lin Li left the Tower of Dusk, the little Dragon Hawk had already reached level 18, which was far greater than the adult Dragon Hawk that Lin Li had almost destroyed just now. It was probably only a matter of time before it reached the legendary realm. Lin Li pinched the Dream Garden with 2 fingers, and carefully looked at the ring that had been with him for a while under the magic light. Before he placed the elemental Wyrm in it, he had to solve another problem, the stability of the world in the Dream Garden. The world in Dream Garden was unstable, and Little Dragon Hawk and Xiao Hua were both powerful existences. Once they entered Dream Garden, the world would probably collapse soon. However, that was not too much trouble for Lin Li now. If it were the Lin Li who had yet to break through to the legendary realm, he might still be helpless, but now, he was already a powerful level 211 mage who had a fairly in-depth knowledge of the field of magic. Although he had yet to create his own space and world, it was not that difficult to stabilize a world that already existed. Lin Li held the Dream Garden in his hand and pondered over it for a moment. Soon, he got an idea and took out a crystal pen from the Ring of Endless Storm, followed by a bottle of star sand and ocean blue sand, as well as a dark crimson Lion King blood together with 6 level 15 magical crystals. Lin Li first mixed the ocean blue sand and the star sand at a 1:2 ratio. A bottle of ethereal ink was soon ready, and Lin Li carefully dipped a crystal pen in the ink before drawing a mageweth on the Dream Garden. Lin Li's actions were slow and gentle. One would only be able to tell that his crystal pen was moving if they were to look closely. Fortunately, Lin Li was the only one in the tent. A person learned in mageweths would probably be shocked out of their wits if they were to enter and see what he was doing. Lin Li was now performing an inscription which was glorified and known to be the most advanced micropainting skill of the division. A master of inscription would be able to paint complicated mageweths within a short period of time. He could possibly even arrange mageweth arrays. This micropainting technique could almost be called a heavenly skill. Once an inscription master had mastered such a technique, it meant that he had reached the highest level of inscription, and was only one step away from becoming a divine smith. Even Lin Li himself had only mastered this technique not long ago, despite having already become a guru of inscription using the Scroll of Wishes. That was a change that was almost an epiphany. As the magical accomplishments of Lin Li became increasingly greater, he gained a deeper insight into the nature of the world. When his accumulation of experience reached a certain level, there might be an opportunity for him to make a breakthrough in skill. If he were to let the opportunity slip, he might just plateau for the rest of his life. Lin Li managed to seize the opportunity, and finally learned the technique of micropainting, thus advancing greatly in inscription. In fact, this was somewhat similar to arranging a very large alchemy array. Expansion and reduction in size was not as simple as adjusting it according to the pictures in a textbook. If substantial changes were not made, a human who got enlarged to the size of a titan would never really gain the power of one. On the contrary, his body might collapse in an instant. When dealing with the Titan spirit, Lin Li would not have been able to make an impact if he had simply used an amplified Requiem array. In fact, the array would not even have been activated, or it might have collapsed at a certain juncture during activation. For example, a paper cup might be able to hold water, but a paper bucket might not. It was the same for compressing and reducing size. During a 100-time reduction of a component, the preceding component might have to be reduced 200 times or 190 times. It was an exaggeration, and many things might not be clear even with accurate calculations. It still depended on the perception of the nomological power. Lin Li used his micro-painting techniques to draw mage with lines thinner than hair on the dream garden. If not observed closely, the lines would not seem to mean anything. Creating a master-level ethereal mage took up almost an entire night, and Lin Li only heaved a sigh of relief when daybreak arrived. He then placed the dream garden on the wooden table. However, the process was not completed yet. After putting the dream garden away, Lin Li grabbed a gold rod that was made of abyss mithril. The gold rod formed in the air a halo that resembled colorful ripples that were cast over the 6 magical crystals on the wooden table. As the light on the top of the gold rod moved, the 6 magical crystals were broken down into the purest form of magical essence, which flew around the gold rod like fireflies. Next, a ray of light flew past. Lin Li pointed his gold rod at the magical crystals, after which they disintegrated into magical essence, incorporated into the ethereal mage. After the lights faded, the dream garden changed completely, and even an ordinary archmage would be able to detect it easily. The world in the ring had become extremely stable, and even legendary-level magic would not be able to make the world collapse. When Lin Li reinforced the dream garden, Xiaohua had already ransacked through all of the items in the tent. Sensing the strange magical wave all of a sudden, it immediately flew towards Lin Li and stared at the dream garden. Lin Li waved the ring in his hand smilingly, and said to Xiaohua, "From now on, this will be your home. Go in and see if you like it." Xiaohua glanced at Lin Li with its guard up and retreated a little. "Go in and take a look, you'll definitely like it," said Lin Li, who continued to tempt it by pointing at the ring. Xiaohua cocked its head to the side and stared at the ring before licking its mouth with its tongue. With joy written all over its face, it joyously leaped towards the ring. Upon sight of Xiaohua's expression, Lin Li was immediately overwhelmed with an ominous feeling. When Xiaohua went up to him, he immediately retracted his hand, causing Xiaohua to bite on air. Tears then welled up in its eyes. Lin Li shook his head resignedly, and whipped out a magical crystal from the ring of endless storm. Xiaohua's eyes lit up again at the instant that it saw the magical crystal. It then happily scurried towards the magical crystal. "You greedy little glutton. I refuse to believe that I can't deal with you." Lin Li smirked and threw the magical crystal into the dream garden when Xiaohua was about to leap at him. "The magical crystal is in there. Go inside." Magical crystals were all Xiaohua cared about, and it did not bother about the other matters at all. Before Lin Li could even finish speaking, Xiaohua had already rushed into the dream garden, cheering happily. Lin Li was speechless. Although Xiaohua had been successfully lured into the dream garden, Lin Li was not the one who put it in. Xiaohua was the one who wriggled in by itself instead. How could that happen? Although the dream garden was used for settling Xiaohua down, Lin Li was the rightful owner of the ring. How could Xiaohua enter and leave without Lin Li's permission? Xiaohua popped its head out of the gemstone on the ring, and called out to Lin Li happily before sticking its head back in. Lin Li stroked his chin, and thought to himself that the matter didn't seem that incredible. When Xiaohua awakened, he provided it with all his mana to the extent of almost fainting. When mages turned magical elements into their own mana, they did not change the nature of the magical elements, and simply gave them their own spiritual brand. Simply put, magical elements with a spiritual brand could be considered mana. After awakening, Xiaohua treated Lin Li like its family member because the mana that it absorbed had Lin Li's spiritual brand. In the process of soul awakening, Lin Li's mana became the nourishment for Xiaohua's growth, and a spiritual imprint was left in the soul. A magician relied on spiritual brand to open his storage rings and other storage spaces. Hence, it was not surprising that Xiaohua could open the dream garden, as it had Lin Li's spiritual imprint. Lin Li cast his mental strength into the dream garden worn on his finger. Xiaohua was hugging the magical crystal and playing along merrily like it in a fairy tale. It seemed to be extremely pleased with its new home. After settling everything that he had to, he realized that the sky had gradually turned brighter, and the noise outside the tent had also become much more chaotic. The adventurer team was going to continue on their journey. After suffering 2 consecutive major attacks from the magical beasts, the two forces had become more cautious, and were proceeding at an even slower speed. The guards and reconnaissance personnel spread out, while tension built up in the main team. One by one, the strong, formidable men completely swallowed their pride. Even the legendary figures kept a sullen expression and carefully analyzed all the information given to them as if they would only have a peace of mind after checking everything. Lin Li was the only one in the team who could still remain relaxed as if he did not care about the magical beasts at all. Cheyenne sent away his intelligence staff and looked at Lin Li, who was standing not too far away. After hesitating a little, he walked towards Lin Li and said, "Master Felix, according to the previous 2 experiences, I'm afraid it won't be long until we encounter an attack of magical beasts again. I hope you can contribute some effort when that happens. After all, we still have a long way ahead, and we can't afford to lose too much power now." It was very clear what Cheyenne meant. Out of the 3 parties, the Dark Blade was the strongest, and the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk had to work together to maintain a balance of power. It might not be a good thing to the Tower of Dusk. However, Lin Li was not too concerned. He smiled nonchalantly, and said to Cheyenne, "Master Cheyenne, rest assured. Haven't you heard before that the same thing won't happen thrice?" Cheyenne was infuriated after hearing Lin Li's words. He thought, damn it. This rascal is too shameless. He went missing for 2 nights, and yet he's pretending to have lost his memory. Who was the one who went missing last night when the battle was at its peak? However, seeing how determined Lin Li was, Cheyenne could not help but waver. Although this guy is shameless, he has never made any empty promise. Could it be that he has found some clues that I didn't know of and found the reason behind the attacks? Lin Li touched the dream garden on his finger, and pressed Xiaohua back into the ring. He thought that the baby elemental Wyrm had already hatched, and no longer needed to absorb large amounts of magical elements. Although these magical beasts appeared to be quite silly, who didn't want to live their life in peace without the abnormal fluctuations in magical elements? As if to prove Lin Li's words, the team didn't encounter any massive herds of magical beasts on the way anymore. Some intelligent beasts even ran away when seeing them. Before this, during the 2 rounds of attacks, these beasts didn't back down no matter what, just as if they had deep grudges with the team. At night, there were many more defensive magical devices and people on patrol when the team was resting. Much to everyone's surprise, the night was extremely calm, and the people could finally loosen their nerves and have a good sleep. The next morning, the team prepared to set off again. After a night of good rest, the team was rather energized. The rare peaceful night was very important to this adventurer team because they were going to enter the true forbidden zone of the Haiga mountain range today. Here, level 18 and 19 magical beasts were common, and it was normal to meet legendary magical beasts if one was unlucky. To worsen the situation, there seemed to be prehistoric magical beasts here according to rumors from the Leaden Kingdom. Although the majority of the prehistoric magical beasts had been killed or exiled during the rule of the High Elves, nobody could guarantee that prehistoric magical beasts were extinct in Amril. After all, those prehistoric magical beasts that existed during the times of the Wyrms and Titans were at least level 23 or 24. If one was unlucky, even a sanctuary realm powerhouse could be. The Amril now was no longer what it was like 1,300 years ago, when powerhouses were common. Most sanctuary realm powerhouses lived solitary lives, and appeared once in a few hundred years. Some even traveled through the cracks between space and time, searching for the fundamental secrets of the world. Sanctuary-level magical beasts were considered the most terrifying beings in the world. If they were to meet one, unfortunately, even this 100-odd-strong team with 5 legendary powerhouses would need enough luck to escape. Upon venturing deep into the Haiga mountain range, Cheyenne, Borg, and even Lin Li raised their guard. This region was rarely visited by people ever since the prehistoric times. Even the elven kingdom that was so near couldn't consider this land their own. While the team slowly advanced, Lin Li used the same time to study the treasure he had while keeping up his guard. Although all 3 factions had this map now, only the one with Lin Li was the original. The one with the Manhwa family was just a copy that Adalo had produced. As for the Dark Blade, they had gotten the map through their spy in the Manhwa family, so it could only be considered a copy of a copy. Over the past few days, Lin Li appeared to be very free, as if he was just in the Haiga mountain range to hunt. However, he was actually busy examining the treasure map, and could now remember every minute detail on the map. From his understanding of the treasure map, Lin Li knew that the Manhwa family and Dark Blade had been more than prepared to get the Immortal King's treasure. Although they had changed the route a bit according to Osric's adventure diary, the final route taken was still the correct one. According to the map that Lin Li had, they would reach the area that the Immortal King's treasure might be in within 3 days. It was just that nobody was sure of its exact location. It seems abnormally peaceful lately. Lin Li released the warlock's eyes and scanned the surroundings for anything unusual. These past few days seemed too peaceful. Other than the 2 magical beast attacks before, the team didn't encounter any danger at all. However, in this forbidden zone deep in the Haiga mountain range, calmness meant abnormality. After all, legend said that the Haiga mountain range was the playground of magical beasts. Powerful beasts had lived here for thousands of years. How could they let so many intruders come in just like this? Lin Li looked where the legendary masters were standing, and pressed Xiao Hua back into Dream Garden with a legendary magical crystal. Even though Lin Li had seen powerful existences like the elemental Wyrm and Titan Spirit, he was still cautious about the legendary prehistoric magical beasts. He had defeated the elemental Wyrm's projected avatar because of the magic forbidding domain created with the heart-piercing potion, while the Titan Spirit lost to the Requiem array. However, Lin Li couldn't guarantee that he could strike at the weakness again if he were to face a sanctuary-level prehistoric magical beast. Lin Li felt very uneasy, and even hoped that this quiet atmosphere could be broken soon. This was because he had a feeling that the longer this peacefulness lasted, the greater the challenge the adventurers' team would face. Lin Li aside, the other legendary masters also looked very serious. Compared to this silence, they would rather face the attacks from those magical beast herds. This abnormal silence was finally broken that afternoon. The mages who stood at the front of the team were suddenly attacked. In a place like the Haiga mountain range, it was no longer suitable to let bandits scout for the team. The archmages who specialized in the levitation spell were better at navigation than ordinary bandits. Moreover, the mages from the Dark Blade were different from ordinary mages. Besides magic, they also learned many skills used by bandits. Hence, they were more outstanding navigators than other mages. The mages who were attacked now were responsible for scouting and looking out for danger. There were about a dozen mages attacked, and all of them were level 17 or 18. They could be considered excellent scouts in the Dark Blade, and even the Manhwa family had suffered under their hands. However, this time a sea of arrows flew towards them once they had entered the forest. Although none of them were killed, all had injuries. Level 17 and 18 archmages had exceptional defense skills. Normally, they wouldn't be harmed even if people shot at them directly. Moreover, the effects of weapons like arrows would be largely reduced by the levitation spell, making it even harder to penetrate the protective shield of the archmages. However, the situation was totally different now. The sea of arrows from the forest below had almost made the archmages turn into porcupines. Because this group of mages were well trained, they didn't retaliate blindly after being attacked. The ones with light injuries immediately ran back to the team to report, while the others activated their shields and protected the heavily wounded ones to retreat. Upon hearing that the vanguard made up of archmages was attacked by a sudden sea of arrows, the adventurers' team started getting nervous. The team prepared for battle after bringing back the injured scouts from the forest. However, what came out from the forest wasn't any powerful magical beast, but a group of green-haired, pointy-eared elves. The presence of the elves didn't ease the tension. Every elf was equipped with either a set of bow and arrows or a magic staff, making the situation tenser than before. Although humans had accepted the existence of the Elven Kingdom, and the kingdom had frequent interactions with the human nations, the deep grudges between the two races weren't easily resolved by a mere 1,000+ years. The elves saw humans as their foes, while humans saw elves as outsiders. If it wasn't the Higa mountain range, there might still be rules to restrain the two races to prevent war. However, here in the Higa mountain range, which didn't belong to any party or influence, there was no restraint at all. Just as the legendary masters from the adventurers' team had come to the front of the team and the two parties were on the verge of battling, Borg from the Dark Blade suddenly laughed. Borg didn't say anything to others, and flew towards the group of elves, not seeming to be surprised by their presence at all. The place was quiet. Only faint sounds of conversation between Borg and the elves could be heard. Borg talked to one of the elves in a fluent elven language. Though it couldn't be considered a happy conversation, they didn't seem to be at odds. Following their conversation, a few other elves walked out from the forest. Lin Li's pupils contracted when he saw the elves that walked out later. These elves weren't typical elves. Judging from the power waves from their bodies, they had definitely reached the legendary realm. One of them was even stronger than Vidas, whom Lin Li had encountered earlier. He probably had the power of level 23 already. Like the high elves, the elves enjoyed longevity that made humans jealous. After the mixing of races during the Dark Age, the elves possessed part of the blood of the high elves. Thus, their talent in magic was much higher than humans. Though it was difficult to judge who was right or wrong during the war at the end of the Dark Age, the elves would have succeeded the high elves as the rulers of Anril if they hadn't been purged. Hence, Lin Li was even more cautious after seeing so many elven legendary powerhouses. However, he wasn't surprised to see them. After all, although the Higa mountain range restrained the nature magic of the elves, it wasn't difficult to have a few non-nature magic legendary powerhouses here. Back at the auction of the time consignment store in Roland City, the branch-like piece of debris of the stars, Rebirth, was speculated to have belonged to the legendary elven mage who specialized in fire magic. People saw this elven mage as an outlier among the elves. However, who would know if he was really an outlier in the Elven Kingdom? Why did these elves appear here? Were they here for the ruins of the Titans too? Lin Li couldn't help but question it. He turned to Cheyenne, but saw Cheyenne look back at him with inconcealable bitterness. Evidently, those elves were related to the Dark Blade, judging from how Borg was behaving. If those elves were the Dark Blade's ally, the Tower of Dusk and Manhwa family would be put in a disadvantageous position. The Dark Blade was already very strong themselves. They had 3 legendary powerhouses and a greater number of elite fighters here than the Manhwa family. If these elves were to join in with those legendary-level elves, Cheyenne's heart sank to the lowest point. It could be said that the Manhwa family wouldn't escape being massacred even if they collaborated with the Tower of Dusk if those several elven legendary powerhouse were to attack. Moreover, the young president of the Tower of Dusk didn't seem to be trustworthy judging from his actions these days. He would probably be the first to escape if they were to start a battle. Borg conversed with those elves for a while before flying back to his team. He then came towards Cheyenne and Lin Li. He just told them that the elves had agreed to let the team into the forest. Cheyenne knew that he could only continue given that they had come thus far. After all, it was impossible to back out now. If he revealed even the tiniest hint of his intention to retreat, the Dark Blade would definitely attack the Manhwa family. However, Cheyenne could see that those elves didn't seem to be close to Borg. Judging from the elves' personalities, most likely they had struck some deal with the Dark Blade, and were only using them for the sake of their interests. Master Felix, what do you think? Cheyenne turned to ask Lin Li about his opinion and, more importantly, to confirm his attitude. After all, Cheyenne didn't want the alliance with the Tower of Dusk to be affected by the appearance of the elves. Within the three factions, only the Tower of Dusk didn't have any past grudges with the Dark Blade. Thus, it was the only faction that could back out now without the Dark Blade having other thoughts. "Master Cheyenne, you can decide," said Lin Li in an unconcerned tone. The elves had inherited the High Elf's arrogance while they had inherited part of their blood. They might have some connections with the Dark Blade, but they would never put the Dark Blade on equal level as themselves. Thus, it was too early to say they were the Dark Blade's ally at the moment. Under the lead of those elves, the adventurer team consisting of three factions entered the forest cautiously. Even those from the Dark Blade didn't dare to relax after seeing their leader converse with the elves. Nobody spoke on the way. Even Borg, who had talked to the elves, didn't look to be at ease now. As for the elves who led the way, they didn't even look at the human team. They were totally uninterested in this adventurer team that could defeat any other in the entire breezy plains. In the forest, the elves had already set up their campsite. Compared to the neat human campsites, the elves appeared to be more casual. However, anyone with sharp eyes would realize that the power contained in the elves' campsite wasn't decreased by its casualness at all. With just the power from the campsite, it was enough to deal with a sudden attack from legendary magical beasts. However, Lin Li knew that this campsite wasn't the best the elves could set up. Due to special reasons, the elves couldn't use nature magic, which they were good at here. Hence, this campsite wasn't a true elven campsite, though it possessed some elven characteristics. If it was somewhere else, where nature magic wasn't constrained, tree men would be hiding behind those tall trees when the team had entered the forest. Although tree men didn't match the trees of war, those tree men would certainly be at least level 17 or 18. With their camouflage merging into the environment, they would be the most suitable defenders of the campsite. The elves could also use nature magic to grow all kinds of attacking magical plants and shield the campsite with vines, or build a little hut with wild plants. However, all these couldn't be seen in the campsite in the Haiga mountain range. Although the fences of the campsite seemed to be made from vines too, they had been created using a magical tool, judging from their energy waves. The tents used were also clearly brought by the elves, and not made on the spot with nature magic. On the outskirts of the campsite, the number of elves gradually increased. There were even families of elves near the center of the campsite. It was definitely a rare sight for the human adventurers team. After all, elves were extremely uncommon in human nations. If it was just one or two elves, people would admire them, but now that there was such a big group of them, the team only felt nervous. The large group of human intruders entering the campsite didn't evoke any intense reaction from the elves at all. The elves would peer at the human adventurers at most, not even stopping what they were doing. Even those elves who seemed to be chit-chatting casually weren't shocked with or curious about the human adventurers at all. This wasn't because the elves were well-trained and disciplined, but rather because they were scornful of the human team and didn't want to waste their time looking at them. As for those who were having casual conversations with their peers, they didn't think it was worth stopping for these humans. When they occasionally scanned the human adventurers, it seemed as if the sky was looking at the ground or an elephant looked at an ant. The team consisting of the Dark Blade and the Manhwa family was a few hundred men strong, and every one of them was at least level 15. However, such a strong team appeared to be like an army of passing ants to the elves. Even the highest level invisibility wouldn't achieve such effects. Of course, the adventurers were no idiots. All of them had experienced enough in life to see through such things. Although the elves appeared to be very cold towards the team and treated them like they weren't there, the tinge of animosity hidden in their eyes couldn't escape the sharp-eyed ones in the team. The hatred between the elves and humans still existed even though 1,000+ years had passed. This was because the elves were very long-lived. Many generations had passed for humans over the millennium, and any hatred would have been diluted down the generations. However, only 2 or 3 generations had passed for the elves since then. It was even possible that there were still other first-generation elves after the catastrophe besides the Elven Queen. Hence, the catastrophe over 1,000 years ago wasn't so far away for the elves that they could forget about it. As he examined the elf's campsite, Lin Li sensitively felt someone looking at him and turned round. He saw 6 or 7 elves standing high up on a tree and looking at him with arrogance. One couldn't deny that the elves had the capital to be so arrogant, since every elf that Lin Li had met in the campsite was at least level 17 or 18. Level 19 elves who were approaching legendary realm were also not uncommon. The elf who had attracted Lin Li's attention was at least level 20, even though he looked very young. That elf held onto a longbow and plucked at the bowstring occasionally. He might be thinking of how he could kill a human adventurer with every pluck of his bowstring. Lin Li touched his chin. He wasn't thinking of how to deal with these elves, but about how the elves had appeared here, what they were plotting with such a strong team, and also how he could gain some benefits from this. Shortly after entering the elves' campsite, the team stopped, and the leading elves entered a tent to report. Not just the human adventurers had to wait outside, even legendary masters like Borg didn't receive any special treatment. It was easy to see the elves' arrogance given that they couldn't be bothered by the 2 biggest factions in the breezy plains and their legendary level chiefs. Luckily, they didn't wait for long. A few elves who seemed to be the leaders came out from the tent and walked towards the human adventurer team. The elves at the side all bowed towards them, appearing to be very humble. Not waiting for the elves to come to them, Borg had walked in front and talked to the elves in elven language for a while. Although Borg was the chief of the Dark Blade and was a level 21 legendary mage, those elves didn't change their expressions at all when they spoke to him, and still looked arrogant and cold. Soon, Borg came back and instructed his subordinates to set up their campsite. He also sent somebody to inform the Manhwa family about this. After these arrangements, Borg followed those elves into their tent in the middle. I didn't expect Borg to know those elves. Looking at Borg walk into the tent with those elves, Cheyenne was rather worried, and turned towards Lin Li. What do you think, Master Felix? Lin Li looked at the surroundings, and replied, it seems like this campsite wasn't built for a day or two. Perhaps they have been here for a while already. Cheyenne could naturally see that too. If it was anywhere else, the elves wouldn't need much effort to build a campsite like this. However, in the Higa mountain range where nature magic was useless, it was impossible to set up this sort of campsite in 1 or 2 days. This meant that the elves hadn't appeared here coincidentally, but rather that they were waiting for the team to appear. More specifically, they were waiting for the Dark Blade to come. Actually, Cheyenne could guess that the Dark Blade was likely to have sealed some deal with the Elven Kingdom. Otherwise, even if everyone had the same goal in mind, it was unlikely for them to meet on the way, as the Higa mountain range was so huge. However, Cheyenne didn't feel relaxed after having some ideas of what was going on. Instead, he felt more tense. No wonder Borg dared to collaborate with the Tower of Dusk and Manhwa family. It was because they had this card up their sleeve. With the Dark Blade's power and the help of the elves, they are not just getting the upper hand compared to us. Cheyenne didn't state it specifically, but he knew that the Dark Blade would overwhelmingly defeat them if they allied with the elves. Back at the start of the collaboration, the Dark Blade had already had a significant advantage over the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk. They had 3 legendary powerhouses against just Cheyenne and Lin Li. Moreover, the number of elite fighters above level 15 they had was also more than that of the Manhwa family. However, with the alliance between the Tower of Dusk and the Manhwa family, at least both parties would suffer the same loss if the Dark Blade and the Manhwa family were to confront each other directly. However, the elves had joined in now. Just along the way, there were so many level 17 and 18 elves already, not to mention the 6 or 7 legendary powerhouses who they hadn't seen, or the powerhouse who had likely reached level 23. With such power, not mentioning the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk, they couldn't match the power of the elves even with the addition of the Dark Blade. Cheyenne couldn't help but feel very worried. After all, the grudge between the Manhwa family and the Dark Blade was almost irreconcilable. The grudge didn't just consist of the hatred from the past, but was also related to the future development of the factions. This grudge was even more irreconcilable than that between then elves and humans. The only solution to this was to wipe out one of the factions completely. From the situation now, it seemed that the one to be wiped out was the Manhwa family. If they were to make a move here, then probably even with our power, Cheyenne didn't want to say such discouraging words, but this was the truth that even a legendary mage couldn't ignore. After hearing Cheyenne's words, Lin Li didn't look too tense, and still had a smile on his face. Of course, this wasn't because only 2 people came from the Tower of Dusk, so they weren't scared that their people would be killed. Although only Lin Li and Norfeller came from the Tower of Dusk, it also wouldn't be easy for them to escape from the combined forces of the Dark Blade and Elves, given the large number of legendary powerhouses they had. Lin Li wasn't worried, because he knew that the Haiga mountain range was the legendary true forbidden zone. He looked at the worried Cheyenne, and said, "Don't worry too much, Master Cheyenne. Even if they want to attack us, they won't do it now. This is the Haiga mountain range. It's a forbidden zone even for legendary powerhouses. Nobody can guarantee that they can come out alive. Hence, if they aren't idiots, they won't do anything to us before finding the treasure." After some contemplation, Cheyenne nodded and replied, "Hopefully the temptation of the treasure can repress old grudges." As for what would happen after finding the treasure, nobody knew. Perhaps the Manhwa family would be unlucky, or perhaps it would be the elves and the Dark Blade. Both sides might even end up in stalemate. Just like Lin Li had guessed, Cheyenne and Lin Li saw Borg coming over from afar when they were making arrangements for their campsite. Borg didn't change his attitude towards them because of the elves. He still put on a smile on his face like before and invited them to meet the elven leaders to discuss the ruins of the Titans. After coming to the central tent at the elves' campsite again, Cheyenne and Lin Li walked in with Borg. Although both of them were legendary powerhouses, the elves in the tent didn't take them seriously. After seeing the 2 of them come in with Borg, none of the elves stood up to welcome them or even say some words in greeting. Lin Li wasn't bothered by this at all, while Cheyenne knew why the elves behaved like that, so both of them didn't care about the elves' attitude. Moreover, the elves indeed had the right to be so arrogant given their abilities. After everyone was seated, Borg first introduced Cheyenne and Lin Li to the elves using the elven language. However, the elves were still very cold to them. After all, merely 2 legendary mages weren't important enough to the elves. Just as Borg prepared to introduce the elves to Lin Li and Cheyenne, one of the elves cut in. Although he spoke in the elven language, Cheyenne and Lin Li could roughly make out what he meant. He was telling Borg to talk about the matter directly and skip the introductions. Borg looked at Cheyenne and Lin Li. With a bitter smile on his face, he explained to the 2 how he had met those elves. Cheyenne and Lin Li looked at each other. With the current situation, both of them already had some ideas about this. As for why Borg was explaining it to the 2 of them here, evidently even the arrogant elves couldn't underestimate the dangers in the Haiga mountain range. Thus, they wanted Borg to secure relations with the 2 of them first. After all, just as Lin Li had said, nobody could guarantee that they could return from the Haiga mountain range alive. It was always better to have more allies. Cheyenne's worry went down a little after hearing this. As for the elf's intention to use the Manhwa family as the cannon fodder, it was too early to say that now. After all, how it was going to end all depended on each faction's abilities. It turned out that the Dark Blade had always been in contact with the Elven Kingdom, and they had told the Elven Kingdom about this mission. Although the Elven Kingdom wasn't too concerned about the ruins of the Titans, they had always wanted to find a long-lost sacred relic from this sacred mountain. Thus, the 2 parties struck a deal very soon. "Cheyenne, our goal isn't just the immortal king's treasure. The elf's goal to find the lost sacred relic doesn't contradict with our goal. Now, it's better for all of us to cooperate to get into the Haiga mountain range successfully and find what we are looking for rather than work on our own. What do you think?" Borg strongly hoped for Cheyenne to agree. After all, he was very clear that despite their relationship, the elves wouldn't help out at all if the Manhwa family were to strike. By now, Cheyenne could see that the Dark Blade and the elves weren't as close as what he had thought. Both parties were only using each other, and couldn't even be considered allies. As such, the balance between the three collaborating factions wasn't affected much. The Dark Blade would still be cautious of the alliance between the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk. After figuring out all that, Cheyenne naturally wouldn't let the treasure land in the hands of the Dark Blade just like that, so he didn't object to the subsequent collaboration with the elves. Lin Li wouldn't have any objections, all the more. He even started thinking about what sacred relic the elves were looking for, if it was useful to him. After the collaboration was confirmed, Cheyenne heaved a sigh of relief, and left the tent with Lin Li to return to the Manhwa family's campsite. After Lin Li had returned to his tent, he continued to do his daily assignment, reading the Book of Eternity. Halfway up the mountain, Lin Li had survived the Titan Spirit's mental strength attack, because of the knowledge recorded in the Book of Eternity. After surviving the mental strength attack from a sanctuary realm powerhouse, Lin Li could clearly feel his improvement in mental strength. Just like how air would liquidize under strong pressure, Lin Li's mental strength became more concentrated. This was probably another good thing that Lin Li had gained after putting in so much effort to disperse the Titan spirit using the Requiem. Array. Back when Lin Li had battled the elven legendary mage Vidos in Roland City, the former had released the Lord of Nightmares, and even he had almost sunk into the endless nightmares. If he were to go fight that battle now, he wouldn't have to put himself in such a situation, given his current mental strength. As night approached, Norfeller, who had guarded the tent all this while, turned into a bat and flew towards the surrounding forest. Norfeller didn't need to report to Lin Li, as this was already a routine after coming to the Higa mountain range. Every night, Norfeller would turn into a bat and investigate outside the campsite. As a high-ranking vampire, Norfeller's abilities improved tremendously after he followed Lin Li. Now, his abilities were approaching legendary realm. At night, the abilities of vampires would enjoy a considerable increase. Therefore, he could be considered to be at legendary level now. Even the most outstanding bandit couldn't match his investigation abilities. Norfeller flew past the Manhwa family's campsite and then the elf's campsite. With his legendary level power, his flying speed was so fast that he couldn't be seen with naked eyes. After going one round around the campsites, he had only spent 15 minutes. Seeing that there weren't any abnormalities around, he turned to go back to his campsite. However, just as he was flying past the elf's territory, a few arrows shot towards him with lightning speed. Although he possessed legendary level strength now, the sharp arrows had already pierced his body just as he wanted to avoid them. Norfeller was shot 7 times. The strange power from the arrows made him unable to fly, and he dropped down straight from the sky. Just when he landed, a group of elves crowded around his body. 7 shots. All 7 arrows are hits. Jacques, no wonder you're the greatest archery genius of us elves for the last 100 years, an elf shouted excitedly and held the struggling Norfeller down. Of course. The 7-star archery skill is one of our strongest archery skills. Even if a legendary powerhouse came, he wouldn't be able to escape the 7-star as well. Another elf looked so proud as if he was the one who shot the arrows. Norfeller wanted to struggle, but the 7 arrows seemed to have sealed his strength. He couldn't even use his physical strength now. Just then, another elf who held a carved longbow slowly walked towards Norfeller. Although he didn't reply to his friend's flattery, he seemed to be enjoying it very much. Looking at Norfeller, the elf looked disgusted. He stepped onto Norfeller's chest hard and sneered. "Dirty undead creature, do you know where this is? This is the goddess' sacred mountain. How dare you dirty this sacred land with that dirty body of yours?" Although the Higa mountain range was filled with magical beasts, the night was extremely quiet. Hence, the elf's noisy exchange stood out during the quiet night, though it didn't attract any people out of their tents. Lin Li was completely absorbed in the sea of knowledge in the Book of Eternity, absorbing the precious assets left behind by the god of mages Juresco, bit by bit. Although he was very talented in magic and had outstanding achievements in other areas, he was still just a little mage who had just stepped into the legendary realm not long ago. Lin Li didn't know how good Juresco was at other facilitating occupations such as pharmaceutics, alchemy, inscription, forging, etc. However, in terms of magic, Lin Li was definitely very far behind Juresco. More often than not, Lin Li had to think for a long while in order to understand a few sentences in the book. After he had finally figured it out, he would feel that he had found the best solution to many of the problems that bothered him in the past. The contentment that Lin Li felt every time he read the Book of Eternity and figured out one more problem made him want to immerse in it even more. However, just as Lin Li was almost about to figure out a difficult problem in the book today, his heart suddenly tingled, and his thought process was forcefully interrupted. This angered Lin Li, but he realized that what had interrupted him was the fluctuation in blood oath from his soul. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.